Welcome to Your Town. I'm Chef Wendy Brodie, your culinary host with Art of Food, and my guest today is a forager and finance advisor, but I know him as a forager. Welcome, Tom North. It's so good to have you, and I can't wait to hear all about lobster, kelp, abalone, halibut, and many other mushrooms.
Yeah.
But where would you like to start talking to us about?
Well, I'd like to start with kelp.
Okay.
Yes. So kelp is a very interesting vegetable. It comes from the ocean, but it's a vegetable. And it happens to be one of the most nutritious vegetables on planet Earth. Many years ago, I was diving in Northern California, in Mendocino, with a friend of mine who is from China. And after we finished our abalone diving, and we had our abalone in our little floats, and he took a piece of bull kelp, and he cut it off and stuffed it into his float. And I said, "What are you doing with that?" And he said, "This is the most nutritious vegetable on the planet." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yes, in my country, we've been eating this for 3,000 years.
Wow.
So I made a mental note. And so I started harvesting kelp. And so we have some slides on kelp, and we'll show your viewers the different kinds of kelp and how to prepare it. So, but kelp I think kelp is going to become a very important part of the culinary world.
Well, since maybe you can describe basically how to prepare it and eat it. Yes.
That's a great question. So kelp in its natural state is indigestible. At least the two major species that we have here, which are bull kelp, and that has a bulb at the end of a long strand that attaches itself to the bottom.
The kind we step on as kids and punch them like the pop.
Okay, no, not that one.
Not that one.
That one is the we call that macrocystis. So the ones that you step on and you pop and they sound like firecrackers.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's macrocystis. And the one that I'm describing now is called nereocystis.
Okay.
And it's the bull kelp. And it has a big bulb at the end of a long stalk that attaches itself to the floor of the ocean. And off of that bulb, there are ribbons that come. And there can be dozens and dozens of ribbons that come off of this bulb. And that's really what we're looking for, is those ribbons. Because you cut those ribbons off and you put them in a big pot with some water, and you have to boil it because it's indigestible in its natural state. So it doesn't do any good to pick it up off the beach and eat it. Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't want to do that anyway, because the beach has sand and it would be very gritty in your mouth. Not at all an enjoyable experience. But you take that and you put it in a big pot and you boil it for 5, maybe 10 minutes. Uh-huh. And then you take it out of the pot and you keep the water. Now you've probably got a gallon or 2 of water in that pot. And what has happened when you're boiling that kelp is that many of the nutrients, the vitamins and minerals, are leached out of the kelp and go into the water. So we set the kelp aside and let it cool. Uh-huh. And once it's cooled, we'll take those long ribbons, and some of them can be 6, 7, 8 feet long, and we'll fold them up like you would a kitchen towel and slide them into a Ziploc bag and freeze them. You know, press all of the air out of the Ziploc bag and freeze them. And whenever you want to make any kind of dish, it could be a vegetable dish, it could be a salad, it could be a lot of different things. It's extremely versatile. And so you take that out of your freezer and chop it up and put it into your dish, and voila, you have a nutritional supplement that is second to none. Do you know what it tastes like?
I was going to ask if it's salty and we wouldn't need to add too much salt to our dish.
Exactly. And what it tastes like is every other green vegetable. It tastes like spinach or kale or collard greens or all of these other leafy green vegetables. That's what kelp tastes like. And yet, the nutritional value is off the charts. So I went to see my doctor, because I'm over 60 years old, to do my blood work, which is a normal thing to do. And so when the blood work came back, the doctor said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "What do you mean, what am I doing?" And he said, "You have the blood workup of a healthy 30-year-old, and you're over 60. What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, it's got to be the kelp." And he said, "Do you take a vitamin D supplement?" I said, "Well, no, I don't." And he said, "I'll be right back." So he ran to his office, came back 5 minutes later, and he said, "Kelp is one of the few sources of soluble vitamin D." Wow. And he said, "So keep eating kelp." And I did. 6 months later, my wife, Connie, went to her doctor for her blood workup, because she's over 62. and so what do you think her doctor asked her when it was time to review the blood workup?
"What are you doing?"
That's exactly right. So kelp is a very, very important nutritional supplement. Now, if you don't mind me sharing another story.
Oh, please,
okay.
Please.
When I was in grade school, I was probably in 5th or 6th grade, and I saw what was at the time one of the first animated and live action documentaries, and it was on human blood. And so there was an animated character, and he was a blood cell, and his name was Mr. Hemoglobin. Did you see this one? Okay, this was the 1960s.
Well, I was around.
So it was Mr. Hemoglobin, and he looked kind of like that Microsoft bobby pin or a paperclip that you see helping you on your computer. They don't use that anymore, but for a while there, it was the mascot for the Microsoft word processing program. Anyway, so there's this Mr. Hemoglobin. He's a blood cell, and he's interviewing a biologist who's an old man with Coke bottle glasses, and he's bald, and he's a biologist. And Mr. Hemoglobin says to him, "Mr. Biologist, if you are truly wise, you will be able to tell me the 2 words that are closest to human blood." And the wise old man smiled, and he said, "Seawater." Our human blood is closer to seawater than any other liquid.
Isn't that fascinating?
And it is. And what I've surmised over the years is that evolution has structured our bodies so that effectively what we are is a physical vehicle for the ocean to occupy the land. Because our blood, that which runs our bodies, is closer to seawater than anything else.
Fascinating.
It really is. So I had that happen. I remembered that. And then I remembered my friend telling me that they've been eating kelp in China for 3,000 years. And so I thought, this is really important. So I have been eating kelp now for, probably 20 years.
Oh, now you are able to forage for it with your
Yes.
diving. Where do the rest of us get that if we don't know you?
Thank you for asking that question. That's really important. You don't want to pick it up off the beach. You know, every winter the big waves come in and they tear the kelp free and they throw it up on the beach. And so that's not a good idea because it'll be very gritty in your mouth. And you'll just wear your teeth down. It's horrible. So where you can go is to the rocky shoreline, and you can go at low tide. Now, if it's after a big storm, and the rocky shoreline has lots of kelp thrown up onto the rocks, you can just pick it up and go home. And the Fish and Game Department, there's no license required for it, but you're limited to 10 pounds per person per day. Well, that's a lot of kelp.
I can imagine.
I don't know too many people who eat 10 pounds of kelp in a day. So you can always go back and get more.
The question is, we've saved the kelp water. Now, what do we do with that?
Okay, yes. So what we do with the kelp water is we let it cool, and we, you know, when you cook rice, it's 1 cup of water, 1 cup of rice and 2 cups of water.
Right.
That's your traditional ratio.
Exactly.
And so we take that kelp water and we scoop it out in 2 cup quantities, and we put it in a Ziploc bag and we seal it and freeze it. And when we go to make rice, we use kelp water, not water out of the tap or out of the filter. And that's where the saltiness comes in. Every time the rice is perfectly salted.
That is a wonderful story.
It's fabulous.
Yes.
Now I have to share one more anecdote about kelp, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
I was fishing at the age of about 15 off the rocks at Carmel Point. And this older gentleman came down, and he was ethnically Japanese, and he had a little lead ball at the end of a string. And he threw that lead ball over the kelp off the rocks. He threw that lead ball over the kelp and dragged it in and grabbed it and clipped it off and was putting it in a 5-gallon bucket. And I asked him, I said, what do you use the kelp for? He said, well, he said, both my wife and my daughter have type 2 diabetes. And I feed it to them and they don't have to take insulin.
Wow.
Well, I always thought of it as a nutritional supplement, but that's pretty powerful medicine. So I don't think of kelp as a medicinal supplement. I think of it as a nutritional supplement. But that's what this, and he was a doctor, he was an MD, and this is what he was doing with the kelp. So kelp has quite a few applications, and it's free. You can go down and pick it up off the rocky shoreline for free, and you can go down at low tide and cut it out of the tide pools. And there are quite a few varieties that are edible. Some of them are not. But there are quite a few varieties of kelp that are edible. So, and we're starting to see more and more restaurants using kelp in their menus. So I think that this is going to be a new wave of culinary interest.
It certainly sounds like it. And since you are so full of information, let's stay in the ocean, and I'll have to have you back to complete some of the other foraging that you do. But with that, you used to dive for abalone, but talk to us about what's going on in that whole scenario now.
Thank you. Yeah, Wendy, the abalone for me is a personal tragedy, because I started diving for abalone when I was about 14 years old, and that was over 50 years ago. So I've been diving for abalone for a long, long time. And in 2017, the biologists who work for the state of California Fish and Game Department determined that the abalone population was under tremendous stress. And it's under stress because about 6 years ago, there were news items about the purple sea urchin. About the starfish. And the starfish were attacked by a virus, and they were dying by the billions. And without the starfish, which is the major predator of the purple sea urchin, the sea urchin population exploded. And so the sea urchin competes with the abalone for food. And so with now billions and billions of sea urchins and no starfish to prey on them, they basically push the abalone out of the food chain. And in fact, the data shows that the kelp, which they both eat, the abalone eats the kelp and the sea urchin eats the kelp. The kelp canopy in Northern California has been reduced by 93%. So imagine you're a hungry abalone and you're looking around for some kelp to eat, and there isn't any. And the result is that the abalone have been starving to death. And last year, I picked abalone off the rocks that were emaciated. They were half their weight that they should be. Yeah. So the state of California said, in order to preserve and protect this resource, we're going to have to shut down the abalone season. So for those of us who are abalone divers, we're just going to have to go through withdrawals. And that's what's happening.
Or the farm raised.
And there are farm raised, yes.
Do you think they're going to help with help the species?
I don't think that the species will go away. There will be pockets of abalone that survive. And so if there's a 93% reduction in the kelp canopy, that means there's still 7% of the kelp there. And it's a very long coastline. So the abalone will survive as a species, but they will simply be under pressure for a long time. And I'm a forager, so I like to go into nature and collect my food and not have to pay for it, other than a minor license or something like that. And so I haven't negotiated with the abalone farms yet to have me dive in their barrels for abalone. I don't think they're going to go for that.
Well, it sounds like abalone and sea urchins, because that's edible and considered a delicacy, that feeding on the kelp, they've got to be awfully nutritious in and of themselves.
So they are. And there are large sea urchins, the large purple and black sea urchins, and they are, very large, and they can weigh a pound or more. And then there are the little, small purple sea urchins, and they're light-colored, and they are the ones that are pushing the abalone out. It's a different species of sea urchin. Now, when I go down to the Channel Islands, or north to the Sonoma and Mendocino counties, there are also large sea urchins, and we eat those too. Wow. They're delicious.
The time has gone so fast, and will you please come back, because we want to talk about lobsters and mushrooms and halibut, all the other things. But thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on your show, and I'll be delighted to come back. We have so much to talk about.
We do. Thank you.